think you guys can hear me. Everybody hear me okay? Seem to have this thing working. Anyway, I'm going to start with the screen share here. Welcome to the last session. I'm going to talk a little bit about WP CLI and walk through adding a simple command to WP CLI. Especially as most of y'all can't see me. My name is Chris Wiegman. I'm a senior web engineer with 10up. I have built plugins in the past. I built a better WP security, now iTheme security plugin, and a few other plugins. WordCamp speaker, teacher, pilot, done a whole lot of different things around WordPress and other industries. If this type of thing interests you, if you've ever heard of 10up and this type of thing interests you, I know most of you won't believe this, but 10up is actually hiring. So if this is something that interests you, or managing folks like me who do stuff like this interests you as a project manager or an account manager, take a look at 10up.com/careers because we are always hiring. So anyway, let's get into the meat of this. We'll start right off because I know this is the last session and some people are ready for bed and some people are ready for breakfast. So let's talk about what is WP CLI to start with here. WP CLI is, of course, a PHP script that interacts with WordPress from the command line, similar to like any Unix command line or Linux command line or the Mac command line. It's not a plugin by itself. It's something a lot of times I see as a point of confusion when we start talking about WP CLI. There's no plugin or theme that you install to get this running. It's something else that you install on your computer to get this going. That said, it works on your server or local dev environment, and it's not necessarily part of WordPress itself. So it can sit on your server. I can go, if I went to my own local computer and just type WP, whether I'm in a WordPress site or not, WP CLI is going to run. So it is something that sits independent of WordPress or can sit independent of WordPress depending on how you have it installed. So if you're running a big multi-site, if you have 30 or 40 sites on your server, you can use WP CLI to manage and automate parts of that throughout. So it's a little bit different than a normal plugin, or it's a little bit different than like Manage WP or Infinite WP or one of those services. It runs locally on your server and it can access all your WordPress installations fairly quickly. It lets you work with nearly all parts of WordPress: content, users, settings, plugins, anything you want. I use it to change database names often, the domain name in the database. If I copy a database from production to my local environment, I'll use WP CLI to change the domain name. If I do that as well, I'll often use WP CLI to set up an account for myself. I can set up an account with super admin if it's a network install or regular administrator access. I can delete other accounts. I can update. I can even just set up a blank folder, say WP Core download, and it'll go out and download WordPress and do the setup all for me. So it's quite powerful in what it can do. There's really nothing it can't touch. And that's mostly, so far, that's just talking about some of the built-in commands that it comes right out of the box with. What's more important with it, though, is it has a simple API, which makes it basically pretty much infinitely extensible. We can write commands to do just about anything we want. So if it lets you out of the box work with things like plugins or themes or other software, we can also do things like write to logs, enable or disable options, write to other software, interact with another API, manage cache, handle security functions. Really, there's almost no limit at all to what we can do with this. For instance, at 10up, we have a service called ElasticPress, which is a plugin that interacts with Elasticsearch. Think of it as WordPress search on steroids. This actually, Elasticsearch itself is what powers things like Jetpack's related post functions and a lot of related posts with other types of plugins. So it's a very powerful search engine that sits behind WordPress, behind PHP and all that. What we've done with ElasticPress is built in a lot of the commands to interact with Elasticsearch into WP CLI. So if we want to take a website, move it from WordPress and index everything in the search engine, WP ElasticPress index will do the whole thing. And whereas on a GUI, oftentimes some of these functions might take you 5-6 minutes or in a GUI in the dashboard, oftentimes without the overhead of a dashboard loading in other pieces of WordPress, this could be a lot faster. I might be able to do it in 30 to 60 seconds, where some of these things, if I did them from the dashboard, would take me minutes. So it's quite a bit more efficient in that respect. It can work for things like Munin and Monet plugins. If you've ever logged into Linode or another host where they have those really ugly old, they look like they were written in the year 2000 graphs. Those are often plugins called Munin. There's another one called Monet, which can monitor something and give alerts. We write plugins to populate those graphs. For instance, how many users are on a WordPress site, how many comments and posts, and we can follow along with those on graphs in the back end to see how a site grows over time, or how many sites grow over time. The interface with that is basically a cron job that just executes a WP CLI command, and that creates some Munin and Monet data that then goes back to these extra services. When I was working on iTheme security, we did it for logs and lockouts. One nice thing, or one maybe not nice thing about a security plugin. One thing about a security plugin is if it does its job right and you forget your password, it's going to lock you out. So things like releasing that lockout through WP CLI were an important feature. So people who accidentally lock themselves out can fix that. One other thing we've done with this before is for large migrations. Let's say you're moving a site with 1,000 pages. Well, you can't necessarily see if all those 1,000 pages are the same after you've moved it, or if you're setting up a new server. So there's nice little applications out there. One of them being Phantom.js that we coded. What this thing does is it crawls a whole site, the new site version and the old site version, and compares screenshots itself using Phantom.js. And if there's a difference of more than 20% or whatever hypothetical difference we want to look at, it'll send an alert back and say, hey, this page has changed, which can really make a complex migration very easy, or much easier than it would be otherwise. You're going to know if every page works as opposed to the home page and the dozen or so you click on to check. We can handle things like fail to ban. If you use fail to ban in lieu of a security plugin, you can disable, you can enable users, you can take a lot of actions off the plugin itself, or handle them in the back end to handle fail to ban for banning and releasing different people. You can offload heavy tasks. We do migrations with it. I do a lot of updates with it. We do a lot of big processing. If a client has some sort of report they want run off their site that requires data from the site, the sky is really the limit there. I can't think of a client that I've worked with in the last few months that doesn't have at least one custom command going in the background for one thing or another. These things do all kinds of things. So there really is, the sky really is the limit. What it comes down to is anything that's heavy or anything that needs to be automated or run often can easily be done with WCLI without any kind of interaction from you later. It's much easier than trying to set up the infamous WP cron, which can cause other things, or simple timeout errors if you start getting really heavy processing. You can avoid all of that stuff very quickly by offloading this to WP CLI if done correctly. So then, like I said, writing a new command is fairly simple. All it takes is, from a basic point of view, is saying, let's add a command, WP CLI, add a command. This command is going to be called hello, and it's going to execute a class called hello world command. I'm going to switch over here and I'll show you how this is done. I've actually written a little bit of a plugin with this, and here's our add command. Real simple. Now, I've also got this installed on a WordPress site, and if I try it, right now, we've told it to register that, but notice it says hello world command does not exist and cannot be registered. So we've already added a command. It knows there's hello. In fact, if I just type WP, well, sorry, if I just type WP, I haven't broken yet. I need to advance to step 2, but it knows the command's there, but it doesn't have anything to connect it to. So that means we have to do something to connect it. What we can do here is a very simple class. In this case, it's class hello world command. We're always extending WP CLI command. And we have one function in here, invoke. Invoke's kind of like a constructor in a normal class. Only in this case, instead of a constructor, what happens is if you have invoke, the command itself, so WP hello, would actually run. There's nothing running until you run WP hello, but this allows for the parent command to run instead of a sub command. Let's see how that looks here. I'm going to switch code around. So then back to our plugin, this is how it looks. Pretty simple. It's just a cut and paste from the other piece. We're going to invoke the WP CLI command, and we're going to write a successful message of hello world. Now when we go here, if I type WP, This lists all my commands. You can see my hello command is listed right here. So we know that WP hello should work. And if I type WP hello, hello world. So that's all it does. That's an entire WP CLI command, a very basic one. And we can take this a little bit further and give you some other examples here. For example, there's how you run it. I've already kind of, I admit I've adapted this from an in-person to an online demo. So I'll probably skip over some of these slides, but if you do follow the slides along later on, the execution commands are still in here. The next step we can do is add some options to it. What if we want to add, for instance, a name or something like that? And this piece of code does it. I'm going to switch over to our actual running the codes area. And there's our new code. So now we've added a little bit different. We've added a little bit of doc block up top here. It's an improved hello world, and it gives a synopsis with two things, name and dash name. The first one is if I was to type WP hello Chris, it would look at this name. If I type WP hello dash name equals Chris, it would look at it like this. So there's two ways of adding the argument in here. The brackets on either side, these square brackets, tell us that the argument's optional. So we don't have to put a name. We can just put hello world if we want to. So now when we call invoke, notice we have two things here, array args and associate args. This is an associative argument. This is a standard argument. So if we want to take the first argument passed, we go to arg0. Otherwise, we can look for associate arg's name. And we can use these just like we would any other variable. Notice what I've done here is I've set the name to world. And then if we've set the regular name, or if we've set the associative name option, then we're going to go ahead and set the named name and then print it out just like we did before. So I'm going to switch over here. If I just do WP hello, we're still at hello world. But if I do WP hello Chris, now we have hello Chris, or WP, the associative view of that. Type there, even better. It does the same type of thing. So it's different ways of allowing for different kinds of options to be taken when we work these out. Come back here, just like in the last slide, some options, some examples of how this runs. Now we're going to take this one step further. Let me switch over our code again. All right. Notice all I've done here is I still have synopsis name, but now I've taken off the brackets. Also here, sanitize string. Remember always sanitize, handle data correctly, even an example. But here what we're doing is hello, sanitize text field arg0. Now if I go back to hello, I've taken off those square brackets, so it's mandatory, WP hello. And it's going to yell at me. WP hello. Oops. WP hello name equals Chris. This is what I get for not watching what's going on here. It's slightly embarrassing. I should have a name here, but arg0 is not apparently working for me. What it should be doing is WP hello Chris. Believe it or not, I did try this beforehand. It's what I get for having the flu today. But the idea here is that we're making the command mandatory. WP hello, I could read, there we go. Hello Chris, or WP hello world. Another point to make here is these are actually two separate commands now. Notice we don't have invoke anymore. When we had invoke it, WP hello world. Now we have to type WP hello world or WP hello name to make this happen. So that's a little bit different. We've taken away that standard parent command and we made subcommands. We could still put our invoke here. We could add WP hello David as another command, and it could say hi to Dave Bissett for you. There's a lot of things that we could do. WP make me a hello sandwich. Tell it to spit out a sandwich. Whatever it might, whatever you want to do with it. But these are different types of subcommands that we can create as many of as we want, as long as they're functions within the class. Coming back to the slides here. another example of how that's supposed to work. And let's talk about then some custom command tips. That's a basic command. Those are subcommands. Those are optional and mandatory arguments for these commands, and a basic command itself. Let's talk a little bit instead now about how some of these commands, some tips to use these. The first thing is you don't necessarily always want to run a WCLI command. Why even load the class file if not needed? So what we can do here is if define WP CLI and WP CLI is true, WP CLI being a constant that's set every time WP CLI runs, then we can set our command or even require our file at that point. There's no sense launching it and running it or even requiring the file for your class unless you need it. So there's a nice way to reduce your load time, reduce server load, however slightly, by just looking for that WP CLI constant in there. Another thing to think about is what everything I've showed you is the success message. When we type in WP CLI, notice this is pointing out success, unless I type in an error here when I was typing the command wrong. We can control these if we don't like the name. If WP hello is not equal to Chris, if name's not Chris, you could spit out an error. When you do that, though, things happen a little bit differently. When you just do success, it's actually going to end the program. It's going to end the execution. And if you just do error, it's going to do the same thing. However, if you want to give them an error and keep going, hey, try this again, you can actually set a second parameter to false. And then it'll continue execution. So that's the exit parameter, and it's something easy to keep in mind. There's also a WP line command, which can just spit out a line of text. But success is always going to end your application or end your script. Error, if done the same fashion, will always end it. But you can keep going with an error too if you want. That's really the thing. Mostly you're going to use that for some sort of input that was not what you expected. Go ahead, try it again without having to go back through prompts or any kind of item to try that script again. Another nice thing it has is a formatter. One thing I've seen with a lot of plugins, it's getting a little bit better, I think, as time goes on, is people tend to use their own display patterns. They tend to, if they want to display a table of users, let's create a table and start spitting everything out in different format, or JSON, or a CSV if you're sharing a CSV. The nice thing about WP CLI is it'll do this all for you. If you want a list of users, ID user login, just tell it to format items as JSON. Get users, and it spits out the fields. We can do the same thing as a table. WP format items table, ID user login. We could just have a list of IDs or even a count of different items. It'll handle all this formatting for you. You don't have to. Not only is that going to save you programmatic time, but if you're using standard, it's going to make it easier for whoever's using it. They're not trying to decipher your version of a table or your version of whatever output you're doing. It's all available to them. It can even do a progress bar. I know there's a couple plugins that have requested this feature in. If you're running a plugin, for instance, a lorem ipsum generator, and you're generating 25,000 posts, I've actually done this for a number of projects for various reasons. Having them spit out every single line of what's going on every time, success, post 1 created, success, post 2 created, can really wear things down over time. So you can actually make a progress bar. In this case, it's generating posts in a current post column. Can tick it up, and then you can finish it, and it'll show a progress bar as things go, as time goes by. It's a very handy way of showing status on a long-running process to your users. One nice thing about WP CLI is that most cases, depending on how your server is configured, it won't have that 30 or 60 second or whatever timeout you have set on your normal WordPress dashboard. So something that does generate thousands of posts of data or some sort of massive database load can run for 15, 20 minutes if need be. I've run lorem ipsum generators for over an hour when I was working on ElasticPress to generate enough data for indexing. Using something like progress bar means you always know where it is, how much time it has left to go, and so on and so forth, and it'll show you what's going on in the background. It's a very handy thing to use, and one of the more powerful display items really in WP CLI, at least in my opinion. Of course, then there's also a number of other utilities that frankly aren't always all that well documented. There's a PHP utilities in the PHP folder, there's a utilities.php file, and it uses things like locate WP config. Write CSV is in here. So you can just write a CSV file out. Launch an editor for input. For instance, if you're a Sublime Text or Atom user, you can actually have it open your default text editor, take an input, maybe a post body, whatever it might be. And when you save that, it's going to take that input back into the WP CLI script. It can parse a URL very easily. Or for those not using Mac or Linux, or if it's not running on a Linux production server, you can actually look to see if it's Windows. So things like path variables can be normalized very easily. So it's a little bit different than, a little bit more powerful than some of the built-in functions in WordPress, but it'll allow you to get in and do a number of things that you wouldn't anywhere else. The biggest part of this, though, too, is even your commands don't have to be a plugin. What I've written here is, if you looked at that, the Hello World is actually a plugin. I just installed it. You can set a path. So WP CLI, you can use a path variable to tell it where to get this command from. So if you have 5 commands, you can put them in anywhere on your server, set the path that when you run WP CLI, and it'll run them from there. So you're not keeping, if you have 30 sites, you don't need to keep 30 copies of your report command. You don't need to keep 30 copies of any other command that you're doing. So it's a very easy way to make sure that you have, that you can use one command across all your sites, your whole environment, whatever it might be. Mount it on the network and use it across servers. It can work very easily to make sure everything's up to date. Then when you change that command, you're not changing it elsewhere or 30 different places either. That's what I have. I know this is the last talk today, so I've intentionally kept this awfully short. I'll be happy to open up to questions if anybody has anything. Let me try to switch back to this other screen here. All right. Off topic is 10up looking to set up a new friend. We have a number of Indian employees from 10up. So if you're looking for work at 10up, India is not an obstacle to you. We do have folks out that way. What are the requirements of the host for adding and using WP CLI? Can it be installed on any host? It's actually just a PHP script in the background. So the host, in theory, can add it. Any host can. Not all do. I know a number of shared hosting oftentimes won't. It's awfully powerful. You know, they might not want you running things across for various security reasons, but it can be added on pretty much every host. Any other questions? I'm not sure how to mark these as answered. Most insane command you've ever written. Dealing with some of the Monet and Munin stuff when you're trying to generate Monet and Munin plugins that have to go to another server, getting them run with cron, file permissions across different